Hello students, as you all know that we are doing the paper, the fundamental principle of social research, and we are dealing with the third unit, which is types and methods in social research. And today we are going to focus uh, uh, from the third unit, the last point is similarities and the differences between the qualitative and quantitative research. So let's see the objective and the learning outcome for this topic. To examine the similarities and differences between the qualitative and quantitative research, and the learning outcome that after completion of this topic, you all are able to compare and contrast qualitative and quantitative research based on their purpose, method, data, and analysis. Now let's begin to see the similarities between the quantitative and qualitative research. Now it is very important that you have to keep in mind that qualitative and quantitative research are similar rather than they are different. Hardy Berryman have pointed out that although there are the differences between the qualitative and quantitative research, it should also be recognized that there are similarities too. They draw attention to the following points. Now let's see the one by one. The first is uh, mentioned here that both are concerned with the data reduction. So data reduction means reducing a large amount of information into a simple and understandable form. So in the quantitative research, uses the statistic like average and percentage and frequency tables, and like making the huge data to be reduced to give the accuracy and to give the correct conclusion or findings. So qualitative research here group information into themes and concepts. So whatever the information we are getting through the findings with the help of qualitative research, we are dividing or we are changing it into the themes and concepts. Now the next we are having both answer research question. So both types of research are done to answer the question about society and social life. So quantitative research is also focusing to draw or to bring out the answer of the question, that is something specific questions, and qualitative research where they are focusing and collecting the data through the open-ended questions. So both try to find out the answer to the research questions. Then we are having a both relate findings to the existing research. So both research compare their finding with the previous studies and research literature. So simply if we are if we are saying that they use earlier research to understand and support their findings. Then third, we are having that both study variation. Both try to understand how and why people or groups are different. For example, researchers may study why some students perform better than others. To understand this, both study differences and variation among peoples or groups. Now next is both treat that frequency is a starting point for the analysis. Now frequency means how often something is happens. Yes, that particular problem जो है वो how often is happening in day-to-day life. So quantitative research count how many times something is occurred, and the qualitative research notice how often certain themes or ideas appears. So example here to understand it, if many students mention exam pressure, the researcher may give more attention to that theme. Simple, both look at how often things occur to help understand the data. Both try to avoid deliberate distortion. Both the qualitative and quantitative research try to make sure that they do not intentionally change or misrepresent their findings. So researcher may have a personal opinions, but they should not deliberately manipulate the data to support what they already believe. So to understand this, we are having example like if a survey gives result the researcher does not like, they should still report the actual result. So in simple word, to understand that researcher should be honest and should not deliberate change the findings. Now the next one, we are having both argue for the importance of transparency. uh, Both types of researchers clearly explain how they collected and analyzed their data. So, in simple ways, researchers should be clear and open about how they did their research. So, both whether you are going for the qualitative research or quantitative research, in both the research method you have to be a transparent and you are able to give the answer to the question that how you have done the research, how you have collected and analyzed the data. Then we are having the another similarity and between this, both address error, both try to make sure that findings are accurate and not affected by any mistakes. So quantitative reduce errors in surveys, measurement and calculations, and in qualitative research make sure the conclusion properly match the evidences which the researcher have collected. So in both try to reduce the mistakes and improve the accuracy. Then we are having the third one is the next one is researcher methods should match the research question. So researchers should choose a method that is suitable for the question they want to answer. For example, if you want to know how many people use social media, then quantitative methods may be suitable. If you want to know why people use social media, then qualitative method may be more suitable. So choose the right research method for the question or the problem which you have selected for your research. So overall, quantitative and quantitative research are different, but they also have many similarities. Both aim to answer research questions, analyze the data, avoid errors, biasness, produce the correct information or knowledge about the society. Now, till now, students, we have focused the similarities between the quantitative and qualitative research. Now, from this slide, we will going to see how these two are different to another. So the first point is here, that is numbers versus words. So quantitative research, till now many times I have repeated the same thing, that quantitative research is focusing numbers, measurements and statistics, and qualitative research mainly uses the words and description and people's experiences. Okay. So in that way, both are different to one another. One is highlighting the numbers and the other is highlighting the words. Then researchers' point of view versus participants' point of view. In quantitative research, the researcher decides what to study, what questions to ask, and what information to collect. For example, the researcher creates a survey asking students specific questions about social media use. Then for this uh, qualitative research, the participants' experiences and opinions are given more importance. Researchers want to understand what the participants themselves consider important. For example, students are encouraged to talk freely about how social media affects their life. So, in simple way, Quantitative research decides the focus, but qualitative participant perspective are emphasized. And here, according to participants' perspective, the research studies goes. Now, the next differences between these two, the researcher is distant versus researcher is close. So here in the quantitative research, the researcher usually stays at a distance or having a less involvement with the participant. So this helps maintain the objectivity. For example, researcher sends a questionnaire to 500 students and collect their answer without personally interacting with them. Okay, with opposite with this, we are having a qualitative research, and here the researcher becomes closer to the participant through the interviews, observation, or interaction to understand their experiences. So a researcher spends time with students and talks to them about their school experiences. So here, because of this, both are different in terms of creating the distance, like when we are talking about the quantitative, so researcher is having a distance with the participant, and the qualitative researcher is close with the participant. Then we are having a theory and concept, tested versus emergent. In the quantitative research, the researcher usually start with existing theory or concept which is available and then collect the data to test them. For example, a researcher has a theory that more study time leads to better exam result. This is a theory. Okay. So they collect the number data, test this idea, whether this idea is correct or not, that if the students will spend more time on study, whether this will lead to their better exam results or not. Then we are having a qualitative research. The research collects data first and then develop concepts and theory from what they discover. So example, a researchers interview students about exam stress and discover that parental expectations are an important theme. This idea emerges from the interview. Okay, so yes, in the quantitative, first theory comes first, then we collect the data on the basis of theory and we test the theory. But in qualitative, we collect the data, we find the themes, and we develop the theory. Now let's focus on the another differences. uh, Statistic versus process. Quantitative research is static. Why? Because it often gives a snapshot of social life at a particular time and focuses on relationship between variables. Okay, so quantitative research is comes under as it is process. So it looks at how things change and develop over a period of time and how different events are connected to one another. Okay, so to give an clear understanding, a researcher follows students for several months to understand how their study habits change before and after exam. So this is a whole process before and after to study the student, that how his habit before the exam and after the exam. So it is a full process. Then we are having another difference between the structured and unstructured. So quantitative research is structured and qualitative research is unstructured. Now why quantitative research is structured? Because the researcher usually follows fixed questions, categories and procedure. So for this, maybe the researcher make the questionnaire where he may will going to ask the fixed question to ask the students. Okay. Then we are having qualitative research, unstructured, because here the researcher allows the participant to speak more freely, which can reveal unexpected ideas. So here, yes, the researcher is going with some question in his or her mind, but when he or she is taking the interview of the participant at the time of the respondent response or the answer, uh, the researcher may ask number of questions on the basis of his response. So instead of just asking the fixed question, the researcher has an open conversation with the student about their uh, study or about their experiences. Then we are having a generalized and versus contextual understanding. So quantitative research is generalization. Researchers often want their findings to apply to a larger population. For example, a survey of a representative sample of students may help estimate how common exam stress is among students in a city. So, uh, qualitative research is contextual understanding. Here, researcher will focus on understanding people's behavior within their particular social and cultural context. For example, a researcher studies why students in one particular school experiences stress, considering their school environment, family expectation, and local culture. Here we finish with our this topic, and in this topic we have focused, we have highlighted the similarities and differences between the qualitative and quantitative research. So today here we are finishing with our fourth subtopic of unit 3, and I hope you have understood the difference between the quantitative and qualitative research. In my next lecture, we will going to continue with the another topic to make it more clear with the fundamental principle of social research. Thank you.